For the first time ever, we're inviting you to join us on one of our adventures. And what better place to start than one of my favourite destinations, Portugal. But we're not just going for the beaches and the wine, we're following in the footsteps of one of history's most enigmatic organisations, the Knights Templar. That's right, we're going on the Trail of the Templars in Portugal. Over 5 days and 4 nights, we'll guide you from the winding streets of Lisbon to the hilltop castle of Almirol, the sacred halls of Tamar's Convent of Christ, and the enchanting, esoteric grottos of Quinta de Reguleira, the very place that inspired my book, The Templar Enigma. Now, this is no big group tour. There are just 6 spots available, and at the time of recording, only 2 remaining. If you want to secure one of them, head to lukerichardsonauthor.com/Templar Tour right now. lukerichardsonauthor.com/Templar Tour. Picture this. You're flying your trusty Cessna above the crystal clear waters of the Caribbean, when suddenly the engine note changes in a way you know it shouldn't. A shudder moves through the airframe, and the nose of the plane drops. You can't pull over, you can't wait for backup, the sea is a long way down, and the only thing between you and it are your own quick reactions. Now, I'm a thriller writer, so I think a lot about what makes the perfect setting, and aviation has it all. But the precision, the tension, the stakes, it's all right there. But how much of it is real? And how much is drama? And why is it something that we, as lovers of adventure stories, just can't get enough of? Today, we're going to find out. Hey, I'm Luke. I'm an author of archaeological adventure novels. I travel the world looking for stories to put into my books and share with you right here on the Adventure Story Podcast. Now, quickly before we dive in, quick. If you would like some more adventure in your life, I'd love to welcome you inside of the Adventure Society. This is my weekly newsletter, and it's your ticket to travel with me, to share my real-world adventures, and to find out first when a new story or a new season of this podcast drops. There's a link in the show notes to join right now. Today in the pilot seat then is Nate Van Coops. He's spent over 30 years in the world of aviation, not just as a passenger though, but as a commercial pilot, a mechanic examiner and a certified flight instructor. And he's taken everything he knows about the sky and poured it into the Archangel Aviation series, following former Black Hawk pilot Luke Angel through sun-soaked mysteries across coastal Florida, the Gulf, and the Bahamas. Today, though, I want to find out how he turns that knowledge into gripping stories and why he thinks we as readers just can't get enough of life in the skies. Nate, welcome to the Adventure Story Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Luke. I really appreciate this.
Oh, it's wonderful to be able to talk about these things and share our love of stories and things that fly, right? That's what it's all about. So you've been working in aviation for 25 years. I thought he doesn't look old enough for one. But do you remember the first time you thought, I'm really interested in this. This is the area that I want to sort of spend my life on?
Yeah, because I actually, believe it or not, started even earlier than that. I was 15 when I first started taking flying lessons. So it's actually been about 30 years now. But I didn't think of it as a job initially. I was kind of a creative soul in high school, and I initially went to school for art, and I thought I was going to be a fine artist. And then I kind of realized pretty quickly, after my first semester of art school, this is going to be a really tough career right out of the gate to be a fine artist. And not to say that was a good reason to quit, but I also already loved aviation. And I thought, you know what, this might be a simpler path to a paycheck initially. And then eventually, though, that creative side kind of snuck its way back in and said, hey, look, I'm still here too. You got to do something with me. So that's where the writing came out. And eventually I said, you know what? Why don't I combine these things? And I don't know why it took me so darn long to think of it, to be like, hey, I'm already doing this. Why don't I write about what I'm doing and use that authenticity in books? So thankfully, I'm not quick, but eventually I figured it out that was a good idea. And sure enough, the readers have responded to hearing about that kind of authenticity. But yeah, I first got into aviation partly because of family history. My grandfather was a pilot. told interesting stories about airplanes. And he flew some really cool stuff. He flew like the P-38 Lightning in World War II, which is one of the fastest piston fighters ever made, And he flew helicopters in Korea and Vietnam. So he had a long career in the service and flew all kinds of airplanes and rotorcraft. So it was fun. I just kind of grew up around it a little bit. Just the idea of that was, something cool to do. And then honestly, fiction was a big part of it though too. Like, growing up watching things like Star Wars, where you got Han Solo and Chewbacca blasting off on the Millennium Falcon and just having adventures. That was inspirational to me too. Thinking, hey, I want to be one of these types who can just go places, see things, have adventures. And I also read, I don't know if you ever read Jimmy Buffett's book, Where's Joe Merchant? There
No, I
was
didn't.
a seaplane in that one that I found fascinating, kind of the Florida Keys seaplane adventure stuff. And, I grew up in the area of Tailspin too, which another one was a cartoon when I was a kid. It had a really cool airplane in it. And I thought, and it also was very adventurous, kind of Indiana Jones, but with an airplane. And there's been kind of there's a subgenre of that's been around for a while. I know Tales of the Golden Monkey was a popular one, kind of before my time, but some older listeners might remember that one. So yeah, it's always been kind of like this idea of airplanes equals adventure in a certain way in my mind. And I thought, okay, if I get into this career, then I'm bound to have some adventures.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think there are aeroplanes feature a lot in the generic thrillers that we all know and love, don't they? But they're not the sort of star of the show. And I think what you have done in your books and the other ones you've just mentioned is you put them front and center. That is a character in itself, that thing, that craft.
Yeah, I think we're used to seeing it as just like, a character gets on plane, and you see like the little plane moving across the map.
Yeah.
And you see the line drawn across the planet to wherever they're landing, and then it lands in that spot, and then adventure continues. I'm like, no, I want to have the adventure on the airplane. I want to see some of the things the pilot sees. So
That's true, because flying is dramatic, right? It's I know now we're sort of used to it. You hop on planes, all the people do it all the time, don't they? You do it for travel and whatever. I mean, you do it for fun, but that's different. But when you think about it, it's sort of, it's not natural, right? It's not supposed to happen. We haven't got wings. It's instantly dramatic. Why do you think it's got that drama that perhaps like getting on a bus or riding a motorbike or whatever else just doesn't have?
There is that duality because we've made it so safe, which is good. We want airplanes to be safe. We want aviation to be a reliable thing. And even now, it's almost frustrating to me where I got on a plane the other day and I didn't have a window. I was in a window seat, but they had gotten rid of the window. It was just a wall. Just expecting that we're just going to sit there on our phones and not want to look out the window. And that was so antithetical to me, and my personality is the whole reason why I got into airplanes, is because I like that view. I want to get up there and see it from the bird's eye and have that feeling of flying. I want to know I'm flying. But that's not everyone. I mean, some people just, it's just transportation to them, point A to point B. But for me, the challenge has been, how do I keep that love of aviation, of the actual feeling and the adventure, as part of the story, and remind people that adventure's still out there, and that these machines are vehicles to adventure, not just point A to point B. And I think that part of the way I do that is tie in old nostalgic airplanes that kind of come from that golden age of aviation. One of the things that I'm doing in my book is I use a 1940s Grumman Mallard as the main hero airplane of my series. It's a radial engine flying boat. So it's, very much that golden age of aviation where, we were splashing around islands in the Caribbean, and, that was, how we imagined air travel was going to be like for a lot of years. And, eventually land planes took over, and, you don't see Boeing making a seaplane very often.
No.
But I think kind of reminding people of that golden age and then having my hero character fly one of those types of airplanes, helps the story.
And I like the way you mentioned golden age there, because we think flying in that period, I've I remember what I was reading, but it was something about British Airways in the 60s or whatever, and they were talking about all of the stuff that you get you buy a ticket to fly to New York or whatever, and you get all of these things to take with you. All of this. It isn't just a throwaway thing; it's a real experience. It's
Hmm.
not you're not sort of packed in like you are today. In
Yeah, it's
these
kind of a mix
planes.
because you didn't have necessarily air conditioning. There were some luxuries that we have now that we
Yeah, true.
wouldn't have had then. It was louder in those old airplanes, but people did dress up to do it. It
Mm,
was an experience. It was kind of it was not cheap, so it was a bit of a luxury to be able to get on an airplane and fly somewhere. I mean, a lot of the people that were doing this had never been on an airplane in their lives before. Or some people had never even seen airplanes still
mm.
at that age of aviation. And a barnstormer would come flying into town in a biplane and land in a farmer's field, and everyone would run out and see it because nobody had ever seen one before, let alone ridden in one. And then they'd pay their $3 to go climb in and go for a 5-minute plane ride and have the best day of their lives. Whereas nowadays we've lost a little bit of that romance, but it's still there. I mean, the feeling is still just as cool, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that, and particularly in the way that you're talking with because when you fly, presumably you don't fly these big commercial airlines, right? You fly smaller
Hmm.
things, more unique aircraft, perhaps. Is that fair to say?
Hmm. Yeah, and we have a small family airplane. I own a 1957 Cessna 172, which was the very
Wow.
original 172 they put. It's like the VW Beetle of planes. It's the most commonly produced airplane in the history of general aviation aircraft, but it was the original version of it. And it's very classic looking, kind of a distinctive tail shape from back in the day. And the fact that it's from the 50s is pretty cool. But yeah, it's a much more hands-on experience of just hopping in the plane and going somewhere, looking out the front window, you know, pointing
Mm,
in the direction you want to go. It's
mm.
much less, there's no autopilot or anything on mine. My airplane's pretty basic. But I like that. I like just the hands-on flying aspect of just really feeling like I'm part of the process. I'm not
Yeah.
just, riding along.
And am I right to assume that with an older aeroplane like that is similar to an older car in that you you have to sort of listen to the engine and you feel the movement of the car. It's not all like nowadays in a car. I'm using this because I drive a car and that's my sort of comparison. Is you've got a screen at the front and it tells you everything you need to possibly know about all of the things that are running. And if anything goes wrong, it will say, "Oh, go and fill up the front tire here and this thing and whatever. You've got 200 miles left to drive on this tank of
Right.
fuel and all of this stuff." But I'm assuming an aircraft like that, you feel it. You feel it
Yeah.
fighting against the wind coming in a different direction or whatever it might be. It's more
Yeah.
intuitive, I suppose.
Yeah. It depends on which airplane you fly. Every once in a while, I get to fly this 1941 Stearman, which is really basic. It's open cockpit biplane, and it gives rides out of St. Pete here. And every once in a while, I get to. I'm kind of been in training to be one of the backup pilots to fly this
Oh
thing and
wow.
give rides in it. And that's real barnstormer stuff where it barely has any gauges in there. It's just stick rudder, not much else,
Yeah, on
and
off.
no technology whatsoever. My plane, at least, I have an iPad that I plug in, and it has a lot of bells and whistles on it that it'll do for you. And the newer modern aircraft, of course, are like what you're describing. They're glass
Mm.
panels up front with every little bit of information you could possibly imagine. But yeah, mine is definitely more vintage. It's more like driving the VW Beetle, stick
Yeah.
shift than it is a modern car. So it's a balancing act, like you want the comforts, but yeah, I get in my plane after the biplane and I think, oh wow, look at this modern plane I'm flying that has a full, cockpit with windshield that I can enjoy. It
Yeah.
feels like luxury after being in the biplane, but
I could
it's all
imagine.
depends on what your expectations are.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that. But the skill of the pilot and the plane itself is only sort of one section of this. You've got the
Mhm.
weather, you've got the landscape, you've got the mechanics of the thing. There's all these different things. And how do you sort of feed these elements into your stories without just making it a checklist of, Luke Angel did this. He went through numbers 1 to 30 on the pre-flight checklist, in sort of
Right.
minute
Yeah. And every
detail.
once in a while, I'll get reviews that say, "Hey, or people say, what happened to his pre-flight?" I'm like, "Well, I just skipped that part. We're just going to assume that he did that. I'm not going to drag every reader through every checklist." That would really bog down the story. But I do try to include the authentic bits that are important. I want people to see real airport environments. So I set the story at Albert Woodard Airport, which is a real place here in St. Pete. Tons of great history here. I, have worked at that airport for 20 years, so I know it like the back of my hand, and I can use things authentically there. And then, I try to use locations I've been, even if I fictionalize them, like the second story, Tropic Descent, I had them take place over in the Bahamas, which I had done quite a bit of flying over there and experienced what it's like to fly in the islands. And even though the particular island I ended up using, I made a fictional name for it. It was a real place, but I fictionalized the whole thing just because so much nonsense happens there. I didn't want anyone living on the real island to think, oh man, look what you did to our island. But I tried to use authentic, cultural aspects. And then, when I set a story in the Keys, I flew down there and said, okay, well, what's it like flying into this airport? And, try to make it feel like the reader is going for a ride. And if they were to go to these actual places, then it's going to look like this. And if they were to climb into one of these airplanes, it's going to smell like this. And it's going to sound like this when you're moving the throttle forward. I really want to get those visceral feelings and sensations into the reader's imagination, because not everyone is lucky enough to be at an airport all the time and get to hop in and out of airplanes. And it's a learning experience. And it's one of those joys that we have from reading. One of the reasons why we open up a book in the first place is to be transported to somewhere we've never been and to learn things that we don't get in our day-to-day. So I do get a lot of readers who are pilots, of course, and pass the book around, inside the flying community. But I also want to make it accessible for people that are not in the flying community and who, are excited to learn a little bit more about airplanes. Because it's one of those things that we've all got some interaction with them. We see them flying every day. We get on and off the big ones. And some of us have, been in small airplanes. But I wanted to expose readers to the fact that there's a whole community and a whole subculture of people who are pilots and what they do and the mechanics and the life, the ins and outs of life at an airport. And then, of course, I throw in some murders, things like that. And I make sure that my hero has to use these skills. And because if not, then, it would have been another character solving this murder or this mystery, whatever it is. And so if it's not relevant to him and his particular skill set is he's a pilot, he's a mechanic. So he's going to use that knowledge specifically to solve this murder that no one else would have put these things together. So that's what's kind of unique about my series is you've got essentially a detective character, even though he's not a police officer and he's not an official detective. He is detecting using his aviation knowledge.
Yeah.
And, solving mysteries and murders and things like that. Even though it's not always the main part of the story, I always like to have at least some mystery element in there. And I really want the solution to be aviation based.
Yes. So he's the only one who can solve it. That's the key, isn't it? Is your man is the guy who can get there first,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's fascinating. And I love that. And I picked that up when I read the first one of the series, Tropic Angel, I think.
Angel,
and the community that sort of surrounds that small airport. I like that. And I felt like it could have been the planes in that sort of community sense, the planes are sort of everyone is a pilot, everyone is involved in the airport, so the planes themselves aren't a special thing. To me as an outsider they are, but to everyone in there they're not. And you've just got someone who's not very honest and someone who's really nice and someone who's this and you've got your own characters in that sort of microcosm of that airfield, and it's a clever sort of way to think about it, I think.
Yeah, and I made that deliberate choice of that where Luke being a pilot isn't special. That isn't what makes him special, because almost everyone in the story is a pilot. So,
yes.
Yeah, I wanted to make that, okay, he's a really good man, and he's a man of action, and he was willing to risk himself to protect others. That's what makes him unique. That's the hero part of him. Yeah, he's using his pilot skill set, but then so is the villain.
Yeah, right.
The villain's also a pilot. So that's not the thing that makes him exceptional. And that way, everyone can find themselves somewhere in these stories, and see themselves in the pilot seat if they want to.
But I think that's why we care about the characters in that book. is and about the planes and things is because they're not just this. He's just a guy trying to do the right thing, and in that we see ourselves, isn't he? Don't we? And
Right.
sort of
Yeah.
that transcends whatever else he is. He's just trying to do the right thing. He's just trying to make a way in the world. He's got financial worries and relationship worries and all the other things that
Yeah.
people have at periods during their life. So we can sort of empathize with him there.
And I think that's a sort of a classic character archetype that we follow and that we fall in love with in adventure stories specifically. There's a guy, he may have a unique skill set of some kind, but we follow him based on his character and the moral choices that they make or don't make. And, why is this particular adventure suitable for this particular character? What is it about them that confronts the world and causes change to happen? And we love watching that. We love watching the action that ensues when this particular character meets a problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we also need to believe it's a challenge, isn't it? Because we know they're going to succeed. That's the book. That's the point of the book. They have to succeed. But also we have to believe that they might not. So if your guy is just a totally perfect, super strong, super clever, can't do anything wrong sort of thing, it doesn't sort of work. It's just the story doesn't stack up. There's not the same conflict. We have to see the flaws as well as the great points, don't we?
Yeah, we want the struggle. It's important. The struggle is the point. And how our character meets adversity and what it makes shine in that character. I'm big on having my characters get beat up all the time. I come from like a classic, like 40s noir detective kind of approach to it.
Yeah,
where
missing teeth
the
and a
hero
black eye.
really has to earn it. He's really got to get out there and suffer a little bit and earn the answers. Nothing's ever just going to be given to him. And I think that's what defines a hero in a lot of cases, is the willingness to put yourself out there and take a little bit of abuse in the interest of truth.
That's so true. That's so true. Yeah, sort of go the mile that other people aren't. So thriller writer to thriller writer, we'll get honest on this. How faithful are you to the capabilities of the planes and the things that you use? If for example, that Cessna has only got a tank that's got so much fuel, will you make sure it can only fly as far as that and you have to put in the refueling stops or whatever, whatever?
Yeah.
Or do you find yourself thinking, oh, that's going to slow down the story. It would be a lot easier if they didn't have to do that, or it could go a bit quicker or whatever. Are you completely to the line true, or do you sort of stretch it for the sake of doing a great story?
Sort of built the brand at this point around authenticity of aviation. Sure. So when it comes to the airplanes, I stick very closely to what's actually practical and possible. Like I made sure that the airplane that Luke uses to fly to Scorpion Reef in Mexico could do it. It had extended range fuel tanks, like you asked, things like that. So I'll find a way to make it work. And sometimes it's a bit of a problem. Like the book I'm drafting right now, he has to fly all the way to Alaska.
Wow.
And that's a long way. And I was like looking at how long, I'm like, man, I gotta figure in like basically 3 days worth of flying for him to like get this far just on the speed this airplane travels and how much fuel he's burning. And I'm like, wow, this is a really long trip. And he's got to make it to Sedona. Then he's got to make it like all the way up to like Ketchikan, and then he's still not going to make it to where he wants to go, all in the 2 days. So he's got to have an extra third day. It was a bit of a drag, like realizing that as an author. And I'm like, man, I really wanted this to happen sooner. But again, here's where I have so many pilot readers that are kind of make up a key demographic of my readership that I want to at least get that part right. And because that's why they're signing on. And I knew that when people first read the first book, they're looking for what's wrong. Especially sci-fi readers are this way too. Back when I was writing sci-fi, people are looking for a reason not to trust you in your first book. But if you can allow them to relax and get enough stuff right that they're like, oh, okay, I can trust this author to do a good job. I'm in good hands here. Then they can stop looking for everything you're doing wrong. Because I think those of us who grow up in aviation, I'm sure it's the same way in the medical field or any other, field that gets shown in a fictional scenario and they just mess it up all the time. We're so used to airplanes being abused that way in movies where like, okay, some guy just runs out on the tarmac, jumps onto the landing gear and like somehow climbs his way into the cabin, which is just impossible. There's no way that you can climb through the landing gear and end up in the cabin. And that's just, from the outside, the casual viewer is like, all right, sure, there must be some passageway. The guy pops out under the lavatory or something. It's absolutely really ridiculous. I've seen Hollywood take airplanes and like put them through walls and then still use them. Like where the propeller was like chewed through a concrete wall. It's an aluminum propeller. Like there's just no physical way that you're going to turn around and like get back in that plane and take off again. But I've seen them do it, and it's just you cringe so badly in those situations that I never wanted to do that to a reader. There are times when I mess up. In my second book, I accidentally put a line in there about thrust reversers on an airplane that didn't have thrust reversers, and because I had never flown that plane before. And I immediately got some feedback, and they're like, by the way, the Phenom 300 does not have thrust reversers. I'm like, dang it. And they're like, you're right. I had to go back. But I was super careful in the first one, even describing the landing gear mechanisms, the emergency down drop of like the opening scene of this airplane. The opening scene, Luke belly lands an airplane and like saves the engines by the way he does it. He shuts the engines down on landing and then is able to like level out the propellers so they don't hit, and he ends up saving the customer like $80,000 or something. So like it shows his prowess. Like it's an opening scene. It's kind of a save the cat method of introducing you to the character and seeing why he's good at what he does. But I spent a lot of time in the maintenance manual, like actually looking to make sure that I got these things right. Because I'm like, if I get this scene right, then people will relax. Then they'll just go on the rest of the adventure and be like, oh, okay, I can trust this guy. And I think they'll allow me a few mistakes here and there. And if I do fudge something down the road, but I'll try to fudge other things before I fudge the airplanes.
I see. Yes, I suppose because you're sort of presenting yourself as an expert in that field, right? But then aviation is such a broad field, I imagine, that it's hard to know everything, right?
Right. There's a lot of airplanes that I haven't flown.
Sure.
So it is kind of fun for me to go do that. It can be intimidating though, but I definitely write faster when I'm writing the airplanes that I've known and flown.
Yeah.
And that's the whole advantage of, I think, when you're getting into writing, trying to, it's the people that write legal thrillers that are lawyers have a huge advantage over someone who wants to write a legal thriller who isn't a lawyer. It's the same concept. I've already jumped this hurdle, in my professional life. So, I have to use that to my advantage and not shortchange myself.
Yeah.
It would be silly not to.
I understand that. I get that completely. I've got a spin-off series that involves a retired Air Force pilot. She started life in my Eden Black series and people loved her, so she sort of got her own book. And I'm very conscious of that I'm not a pilot. We have to look these things up. I've worked with a co-writer on it. We have to look these things up. We have to do a lot of Googling, a lot of sort of research in these things. But ultimately, I suppose you never get everything right. And it's reassuring to hear that even you've made a couple of mistakes here.
Yeah, there's certain topics that I've wandered into and tried to research my way through. Because, I've done a little bit of, shooting at a gun range here and there. But, like, if you get into the area of guns, for example, people are so particular about that. And if you try to assert any sort of truth in there that is in any way inaccurate, you will get feedback so quickly. And, real experts on things will chime in, so I think it kind of helps to stay in your lane. Like it's where I'm not ex-military, so I don't lean too heavily into Luke's ex-military background. Whereas the guys that are ex-military, you can have a much more authentic voice on that experience and the lifestyle afterwards and kind of the connect, the emotions of having been in and served. So I think that's where a lot of thriller fiction gets its authenticity is, people who have actually served and then write characters who have. But yeah, I try to stay out of quicksand when I can. There are some research traps that can really sink you if you do them wrong.
I can imagine. And just these glaring things that someone who knows that field would be like, right, that's wrong. But
Mm.
personally, on a sort of personal level, one of the things I am planning to do, and I would love to do, to research this series and to just sort of give that some more authenticity, really, is to do a flying lesson. And I know you can do them all over the world. I've never done it before. I think it would be great fun. Any advice for someone in that position? Where do you even start? What's the thing? What's the process?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think anyone who's ever had an interest in flying should definitely do it. There's no age limit. There's no reason not to. You can contact local flight schools usually. So the great thing about airports is 90% of the airports in the world are small airports. They're not the large, big ones that we interact with just for airliners. So if you look around, there's a small airport near you somewhere,
Mm.
and someone at that airfield is giving flying lessons because it's just a baked into the ecosystem of flying that someone will be giving lessons. And oftentimes, flight schools will offer an introductory lesson. They call it like a discovery flight, is what they call it here in the US. And it'll be a discounted flight. You just hop in for about half an hour or so. You'll meet with an instructor. They'll take you out to the airplane, kind of show you around, and they'll put you right in the pilot seat and say, okay, here we go. And oftentimes, they'll even let you do the takeoff because the takeoff is something that, even a beginner can do in most tri-school gear airplanes, which is like where the nose wheel's in the front, which is most common now. Doesn't take a whole lot of work. It's just kind of like, point it the right direction and push
Yeah,
the
right.
throttle pull and go. And then, pull back a little bit when you get to the right airspeed. And then you're flying. And then you're up there. You get to do some straight and level. You get to do some turns and climbs and descents and get a feel for it and just to like, get a sense of what it's like to fly. You get a real sense of the wind, the fact that we're living in a fluid and, how much the air moves and, bounces you around or not, depending on the day. And it is a unique experience that if you have never done it, then I definitely recommend it. And then they don't usually let you land on the first try
No, right.
on that lesson, but sometimes let you do the setups and stuff and kind of give you a good overview of what you could expect if you did want to become a pilot. And, the only fair warning is it is kind of addictive. It's super fun and you're going to want to do it again. So, watch out or you might end up with a pilot's license in your pocket.
Oh, my days. Yeah, sure. Well, when we speak next, ask me about it because I said the same to Nick Harvey when he was on the podcast a couple of months back. I said, I've never done diving. I'd love to do it. It's something I need to do because I write diving scenes all of the time, like quite
Hmm.
frequently. And it's one of those things that I think would just be really cool to try personally and as a writer as well. So, yeah, hold me to that, Nate, please.
All right. We'll check back in.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. One more question. We did mention this at the start of the podcast, but I wonder if you've got anything to add to that, because I ask it to everyone as the last question. Looking back, what adventure stories, whether they're books or they're films or they're legends, gave you that thirst for adventure? And you could take this basically sort of both ways. You could take it your thirst for adventure as an author or as a pilot and you're sort of going into aviation.
Hmm. Yeah, and like I said, I touched on a couple. Like there was that Jimmy Buffett book, but there was a movie. There's a couple of movies that were great when growing up. One was called 6 Days, 7 Nights, which with Harrison Ford, where he has a seaplane and he's supposed to be in like Fiji. I think they filmed it in Hawaii, but they have a survival adventure. He and Anne Hesh, the characters,
Oh,
they
I've seen
crash
that.
land.
I
They
remember
crash
that.
land,
Yeah.
yeah, on an island and have to survive. That was a great one because it got a lot of the aviation pretty accurate. There was another one called Air America back in the day with Robert Downey Jr. and Mel Gibson. Had some really fun flying in there. There was, they were in Laos, kind of pre-Vietnam. American Made later on with Tom Cruise came out, and that actually had a lot of drug smuggling and CIA stuff in there, but the aviation was pretty accurate. So I really liked that. So yeah, there's a lot of these stories. Like I said, even Star Wars back in the day was just really inspirational to me. Just the idea of blasting off around the galaxy. And Indiana Jones, of course, was another one. There was, we love that
Yes.
era.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting because we as creators then turn around and write new stories that maybe will inspire the next generation, which is kind of fun.
Let's
So
hope so. That's sort of what we
pass
want,
it
isn't it?
on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly that. Nate, tell people where they can find you and your books and your stories online.
Sure. Yeah. You can go to natevancoops.com. My last name is two words. It's VANCOOPS. And I'm Nate Van Coops on Instagram. You can find Nathan Van Coops on Facebook, all over the place. So Amazon is where most of my books are. Audible, they do really well. I have an amazing narrator named Scott Brick, who's done a lot of cool action adventure stories over the years. He's fantastic at reading the series and voicing Luke Angel. So check him out on Audible or wherever you get your audiobooks. And yeah, I'd love to connect. So if you have listeners who want to check out the stories or learn more, then definitely hit me up. I try to answer all my emails. So
Wonderful. Thanks so much. That was amazing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Luke. I appreciate you having me on. This has been a lot of fun.
I absolutely love that. And the challenge has been set. Flying lesson needs to happen at some point in the next few months. Nate's told me, and he's gonna bring that up if we speak again in the future when I have him back on the podcast, isn't he? So I need to make sure that happens. And I think genuinely it would be great fun and interesting and good for the writing for the books. I'm talking myself into it even more. Anyway, this is the Adventure Story Podcast. Thank you so much for hanging out today. If you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe, please like, and please share. It will take you just seconds, but really helps me spread the word about this show. Totally true. So many recommendations now, even in our world of algorithms and all of those sorts of things, come from people recommending things to other people. So if you know someone who likes adventure, please do that. It helps more than you know. And if you need more adventure in your life, like I said at the top, you might like to join the Adventure Society. This weekly newsletter is your ticket to travel with me, to share my real world adventures and find out first when a new story or a new season of this podcast drops. Link in the show notes. And if you're a fan of adventure stories like those we've talked about today, check out my books, lukerichardsonauthor.com. Bon voyage, enjoy the adventure, and I'll see you next time.